situation is so bad, how do you explain the fact that people like yourself, Isis, American educated, raft of opportunities overseas, why do you come to a place like Kenya to do business when you can hear what John's saying, you can hear what Wangui is saying, just about how terrible the situation is? Why would you do that to yourself?
No, it's interesting. I think from a business perspective, it really depends. It can really depend on the type of industry that you're in, and that there is a huge amount of opportunity in Kenya specifically. There's a lot happening. I work in the technology sector. There's so much, global excitement and interest in Kenya from a technology standpoint, and developments that are happening here. So it's interesting because that superseded maybe some of the daily grind issues around corruption and that perception. And it's actually, I think it's healthy for the country in some ways to if we kind of look at the challenges ahead over the last few years, to have this really kind of positive light from a global perspective coming out of Kenya, because it actually is a reflection of very real positive work that's happening in the technology sector here. So I think that from a when you think about opportunities and you weigh risks, right? You weigh cost to business, and those are things that you can't ignore. But at the same time, as an working for an international company, you draw a very clear line. Like, you just don't cross the line.
But let me ask you, have you had to pay a bribe or do a favor for somebody to get over those hurdles in trying to establish what you do?
No, you just have to draw a line. You just have to draw a line. Okay. You just can't. Because I think if you do it some of the time, that's where the problem really starts, right? Like, if you just have a very clear line from a business perspective, then you understand that, hey, things might not move as fast. We may not be able to do X project or Y project because of these kind of barriers. You just, from a kind of an ethics standpoint, a leadership standpoint within the company that you're working in, and now those are the companies that I have worked for, then you just don't cross the line. Yeah.
I'll tell you why most of us come back. Yeah. There is no better country to be in the middle class in. There are two separate Kenyans. There's not one Kenya, there are two Kenyas. There are people who are completely immune from corruption, and I'll give you an example. If you're sending your child to a private school, it's of no consequence to you that funds for free primary education have been squandered. If you drive a certain quality of a car, the ordinary traffic policeman isn't going to stop you. There are two separate kinds of Kenya. There are Kenyans who do not know about the misery that exists in the country because they don't interact with it. Okay. They live in the suburb. They go to the bank, and the bank has an aisle for the prestige bankers, and they have the banking hall for the regular banker. So if you've got small money, you queue until the cows come home. But if you make millions, you go and you have a cup of tea at the bank.
I'll let John come in first, then James.
Part of the reason people now, even Al Jazeera comes to Kenya to talk about corruption and what's happening here, is as a result of the post-election violence that we had after the elections in 2007, 2008. That shook the whole world. Kenya was an island of peace and stability in a very, very troubled region. And the violence snapped us out of that complacency. Now, it does to remember that the violence took place in the middle of one of the most sustained economic booms Kenya has ever had. We had an average of 5.5% economic growth between 2002 and 2007. The stock exchange in the same time had grown by 400%. With a housing boom, we've built more roads in the last 6-7 years than in the previous 30 years. So we have rapid growth, no employment, a youth bulge, increasing corruption, deepening inequality, and those contradictions increase volatility and the potential for violence. So it's contradictory. So yes, in this bubble of Nairobi, where we have watchmen to guard us instead of policemen, where we don't have to interact with the rougher sides of the state, it's a wonderful life. I would recommend it to anybody. It's a far better quality of life if you're middle class here than if you're middle class in the UK.
Came to you again.
Actually, the point is that just listening to ISIS, you see, when you have big corporations coming into the country against the backdrop of very poor people, that in itself fuels corruption somewhat, because it leads to what I'll call the economics of exclusion. And that's why you'll be happy as a middle class as long as you're working for a corporation. But now the Kenyans who are watching you from outside cannot benefit from that. So there's that competition then that starts fueling corruption.
I'd also like to say one thing, that because a lot of reference has been made to 2003. I recall in 2003 when the new administration came into play, Kenya was recorded as the most optimistic nation in the world. And frankly speaking, that ought to have been a sign that things weren't good. Because when you're having fundamental reforms, you cannot be optimistic. Fundamental reforms are by definition difficult because you're changing the pecking order of things. So fast forward to today in terms of implementing the new constitution. And unlike 2003, today as we implement, there's a lot of angst and hand-wringing and there's a lot of complaining about the fact that there are non-reformist forces, which is true. And that tells me that when you have the anti-reform forces bubbling up, then you're actually beginning to affect the fundamentals.
Yeah, but where does that take us in terms of the fight against corruption? Because we've talked about two Kenyas, two separate Kenyas for a lot of people. Where does this take us?
At first, I'd like to agree, and as Wanje was saying, in relation to that, there's what I call Kenya as a champion at public relations, whereby if the international community wants to find out about Vision 2030, we'll set up something, give you fancy words, the colors. I see it every time. You see, that gives the international community that they're trying to do something, but are they actually doing it? Have they started something? He's saying Vision 2030 will get there. Have they started doing something to get us there? What are we doing to get us there?
Are you convinced though when you hear Mugo talking? Are you convinced by what he's saying?
I'm a young person. I have dreams, and we want to challenge the society. We want to conquer this thing, but when it's difficult, you can see we're getting enlightened day by day and we're seeing how difficult it is. And when ISIS talks from a business perspective, you have to realize the fact that when they come to Kenya, somebody from the Kenyan side will handle the tough side. From the bribes to the connections, all ISIS has to do is bring the money, and the business will continue to grow and everything will be fine.
But there's also an international aspect to corruption. I'll give you an example, something that's currently going on. We have two of our, there are two Kenyans right now being extradited, who need to be extradited to the UK because apparently they received bribes a while back for energy.
Money laundering.
For money laundering, and the money being laundered was bribes that they'd received. What I haven't heard from the United Kingdom's government is what they are doing about the companies that offered the bribes in the first place. That's completely silent. It's missing from the transaction. When you talk about this country, for instance, if you go through our debt register, we are paying, for instance, for Kenyan fertilizer factory. We've been paying to Austrian banks for the last God knows how many years. The factory does not exist on the ground, but we are paying for it. The same Austrian government has paid 3 times for a dam that hasn't been built. They keep advancing the same loan for a dam that they know hasn't been built. When a foreign government is willing to give you a loan to build the same thing 3 times, they are part and parcel of the corruption mechanism. What we don't hear is what the foreign countries are doing in terms of helping us with the corruption. Money that has been stolen from Kenyans, especially on the big accounts, is lodged abroad. Just last week, the UK government that is seeking to have 2 Kenyans extradited to the UK said that Yagnesh Devani, who is responsible for one of our biggest oil scandals, cannot be brought to Kenya. Their argument, our courts are not good enough. That's all very well, but we are saying that this man is responsible for an energy crisis in the billions of shillings. Money that left our banks, and we, the taxpayers, had to cover that for them. And the UK government is comfortably saying, we're not going to give him to you, but do give us these people who received bribes from our companies. And I haven't had a single word said about what they've done about the companies that bribed in the first place.
And I'm going to ask you to hold right there. We're going to take a quick break and be back very soon. Welcome back to the Café in Nairobi, where we're discussing the high cost of corruption. So guys, we've established we seriously do have a problem in Kenya with corruption. How do we move on? What do we actually do? Eric, I'd like to hear your thoughts.
I'd like to find out whether it's possible to have some kind of class action suit, because the problem is, while we need to look forward with Vision 2030, I think we need to take care of the stuff that's come before. I'll give you an example. A month ago, I finally succumbed to my wife's desire for us to play Monopoly as a couple, and I was worried that there might be some friction. And so sort of 4 or 5 rounds into the game, she picked up this chance card, and it said, pay your opponent 10 times the roll of the dice. She'd rolled 11, right? And so but we miscalculated, and she gave me $1,100, and you start the game with $1,500. So she pretty much gave me everything she had. After about 6 hours, right, when we realized the mistake, She said, okay, then pay me back. But at that point, I had acquired so much that even giving her back what was rightfully hers, I won the game, hands down. And so the question is, there's so much that has gone wrong, right? Even if at 2030 we arrive at the vision, there's still so much that has gone wrong, and we need to find out how to correct that. So can we do a class? You're a lawyer, tell us. Can we take these people to court as a nation?
You have the right to. You have the right
Will we win?
That's a different question altogether, because now that depends on the systems we have. But I'll say this for young people, we need to keep pushing, we need to keep fighting, we need to keep the dream alive. Because Kenya have been oppressed for the last 10, 15 years. 15 years ago, corruption was a thing of the government, the international contracts, but now it has become entrenched in the society because it has become a weight that the people feel. So what do we do as people, We push, we fight. You have to keep on moving forward. There's nothing else as a people you can do. You need to vote in the right leaders.
But how do we do that, guys, if there's so much impunity? I mean,
I think we made a great start with the new constitution. Okay. Those of us that have been in this process long enough, we agitated for certain things to be in the constitution, and we did put them in the constitution. For instance, one of the places where corruption has really affected the ordinary citizen is in the judicial system. And we've put in a lot of effort to not only be able to restructure our judiciary, but also to restore the confidence of the ordinary citizen in the system. But we've also put inside our constitution certain key elements that were missing. Constitution thrives in secrecy. And one of the things that ordinary citizens have had a problem with in Kenya is what was the Official Secrets Act. Every time you sought to find out information, you were hit by the official secrets. We've put in the Constitution something about access to information as a right. One of the other things that we've had a problem with, the corruption in Kenya is embedded in poor service delivery. If you go to a government office, I'll pick one of the most common one, the Lands Ministry. You want to obtain your document of title, and you're unable to obtain it because somebody somewhere says the file is missing, which for us is code for give me something and I'll find the file. So what we've done is we've put in the Constitution, actually within our Bill of Rights, a provision for a right to fair administrative action. Means that the lands officer should be able to give you what you want. And if he's unable to give you that, he should give you a written reason why, which means you have a document you can work with in court. One of the other problems we've had in this country is simple ignorance. The ordinary citizen simply doesn't know what to do. In the past, those of us who wanted to do something legal about it, we were always hit by the fact that we don't have locus standi. The thing doesn't affect you, therefore you have no right to stand in this court. We've taken that out. In the new constitution, I can go to court on behalf of poor women in the slums to demand that they access a particular right accruing to them. We've put in a lot of things. What is missing right now, especially for us Kenyans, is simply downloading the information about the new terrain we have created so that the ordinary citizens can see the opportunity of changing these things.
But I'd like to just come in there, because obviously that ignorance amongst ordinary people is widespread, and the new constitution is not even being implemented as fast as some people would like.
So I just want to build on the point that you were making earlier, and about how there's a lot of things that things are on the move, but I think we also stand at a unique point in time where access to information is that much greater than it ever has been, right? You talk about 50% of Kenyans having access to mobile phones. You talk about 25% of access to the internet, and those rates are growing, right? So if we look at how to leverage that type of technology to actually make this information accessible to people in a very meaningful way, where you can very quickly, whether it's by SMS, whether it's by mobile web, you're in a government office, you know what the process should be, you know what the costs and fees for certain things should be, and you've got that information there. That in and of itself is very empowering to at least build, cut off the ignorance level of how should the system work. And we're already seeing examples even in Cameroon of apps like this where you can go into government office and see that this is what the process should be, and you at least have that information. And so I think that's something that we need to leverage.
Yeah, and I think that, I think we all agree that's great going forward, what technology is doing to make Kenya flat. But what about the past, the Goldenbergs, the Anglo leasings, the Triton, the May scandal, the primary education scandal? How do we address the past? Because that's an important part of making people feel that people have been held to account. Or do we say, look, let's just wipe a clean slate from 6 months from now, we'll just forget about all the past corruption cases that ever happened in Kenya and start all over again? I mean, seriously speaking, what do we do?